guys, welcome back to the show. In this video, we'll be learning how to build a simple React application using React Typescript. Then we will go on to animated application using React Spring, and then we'll write a unit test using just an enzyme to test the application and to see that all the functionalities are working. If you have no idea as to how React works, how TypeScript works, don't worry because I'll go through the basics with you for you to understand what we're doing and what we're trying to build. I've created a directory called to-do app, which is currently empty. I have nothing in there. So what I'm going to do now is to create the React application. How to create the React application depends on two things. You can use npm create React app or you can use yarn. What I'm going to do is to use yarn to create the React application. If you don't have yarn installed, make sure you install yarn. And how do you install yarn? If you'd like to install yarn, all you need to do is to type in your terminal brew install yarn. You can only use this if you have Homebrew installed in your Mac, or you can use like the sudo port to install yarn if you're using Mac. I'll provide a link to the installation of yarn in the description of this video so you can check it out. So I'll go ahead and create the React application using yarn. How I like to do this is to say yarn create React app. I'll call it my to-do app. Then I'll use the dashes and specify the templates that I would like to use. So I'll say template TypeScript, like so. So now we have our app created. As you can see, my to-do app. So I can do cd into my to-do app. And I have everything that I need to start the application. The next thing I'll do is to go into my app.ts file and I'll get rid of everything here. Have an empty app and I'm ready and good to start. Now let's think about what we would like to do for a moment. We would like to create a to-do application. So we will have like a text input field where we will type in what we want to do and then that will be rendered on a card. So in my head, we need at least two things. We need a form component, which will be the text field where we will type in what we would like to do, and a card component which will render all the to-dos that we would like. Okay, so what I will do now is to create a component inside of the src directory. So I'll say new folder component, and inside of the component I'll create in two other directories. So I will say new folder card, and I'll create another one again called form. So at least I've got two directories in which I'll have my component. Now instead of the card component, what I like to do next is to create a card file. So a card.txs file. So this would be the card component, and I can say import React from React. Okay. I'll create a card which will be of type React dot function component, and it will just be a function right now that returns. Right now, it's a div that returns hello. Nothing much. I'll get rid of this. And that is the card component that we can start working with right now. And obviously, I need to export this. Okay. So what do I have over here? I've got a stateless functional component that just renders or returns hello. Okay. The next thing I would like to do is to create a page directory, which will be the to-do page, where I will join all the components together to create the to-do application. So I'll create a directory, I'll call it page, create a new file and say to-do page.txs. The next thing I'll do is to import React from React. Then I'll create a to-do page, which will also be React.function component. Now it is also a function, it takes no props, and all it does is that it returns something, and what we like to return is the card. Okay, so I'll say import. What would I like to import? I would like to import this card that I have exported. So this card from card. So what I have right now is a to-do page. I need to export this. Okay, and then I'll go into the app component. So the app.ts file. I'll get rid of this because it's not being used anywhere. Then I will import to do page, from components page to do page. And all I need to now do is to make the app render to do page. Okay, now I could say yarn start. If you're using npm, you can use npm start. Okay, so there was an error because I spelled this wrongly. So I'll go on to correct that. And that should fix it. We have hello right here. So let's do a recap of what we just did. We created a components directory, and inside of the component directory, we have card, form, and page. Instead of the card component, we just created a stateless function component that returns hello. We exported that into the page component, which renders card. So the page component or the page component will be where we add everything together to create a to-do page. And then we exported that page component to the app component to get rendered. And that's basically the basis to get started. And we have a hello on the page. Now we can think about what we need to do to create the to-do application. The next task will be to create the form. So we need to create an input field inside of the form directory. We need to create a form component, which will be an input field that we can type in something. So let's start by saying form.txx. Again, we import React from React. You create a form, which will be of type React.function component. And for now, it will return. We like to return a form, and the form will have like an input field, the type. Let's give it text, and then placeholder, enter to do. We'll go ahead and get rid of this because we have two imports, and then we will export this for now. So I'll say import. What would I like to import? I would like to import the form from form form. Okay, so I'll have this form right here, like so. And now I have my form over here. Let's go over what we just did. So I created a simple form with an input field with a type called test and a placeholder which says enter to do. I then exported that form to the to do page. Then I rendered that form on the to do page. Now we need to add some state to the application to track what the user enters in the input field. What do I mean by that? What I mean is I want to be able to track what the user enters over here. Take this and then render it in place of the hello. So how we would do this is by creating inside of our to-do page, we need to create something that will track what the user types. So that will track what I type in here and then render that thing over here. So how we're going to do this is by creating a state. Okay, so we will create a state inside of the page and we will name this state initial to do. So const initial to do and then set initial to do. Then we'll use the React hook useState and then pass it an empty string initially, like so. What the useState does is that it takes in an initial value which is set to the initial to do, and then I can set the state to anything I want using the set initial to do. I now need to pass this initial to do to the form and connect whatever I put in here to the input field. How I do this is by saying initial to do value will be the initial to do. As you can see, I'm getting an error because I'm not expecting that prop. So I now need to go to my form component, create a type, and I'll call this type form prop. So what this type will have is that it will have an initial to do, which is of type string. So initial to do, which is of type string. I can now pass it to the React functional component and then extract that prop, which is the initial to do value from the form prop. Okay, so now I am allowed to specify the value attribute on the input field and then pass it the initial to do value, like so. So now, if I go back to the to do page, let me show you what we have over here. There isn't anything over here, and I cannot type in anything. Anything I type inside of the input field doesn't work because I've set the input field to an empty string. Now, if I change something over here, okay, and I save this, then I go back, you can see that I have that thing over here. So what I now need to do, let me go back. What I now need to do is to find a way to set whatever the user types in here inside of this input field. I need to find a way to store that so that what the user types is stored. I can do that by creating a function called handle input change. And remember, this could be any name that you want. I'm just calling this function handle input change. This function will take in an event, which is of type change event, and it's HTML input element, and then returns void because I don't want the function to return anything. What this function will do is very simple. It will set the initial to do to whatever the user types in the input field. So I'll say e dot current target dot value. So when I call this function, it will set. So this is the set initial to do. Whatever I type in here will basically be passed to the set to do, which will now set it to the initial to do. As you can see over here, it says that the field prop hasn't got any onChange handler. So right now, what I can do is to go back and then pass this function to the form. So I can say that onHandleChange. I'd like to set the onHandleChange to this function. I can now go into my form and let this function, this prop, expect an onHandleChange. So it has to expect this onHandleChange function, and this has to be of type, and then it returns void. Let me go ahead and import this from React. So let's go over what we just did. I've created an initial state and a set state. The initial state is an empty string. I've now created a function that takes in an event, which is of type change event of HTML element. And then when the event changes, I set the initial to do state to what the person types in the input field. Inside of the form component, I now can pass onHandleChange function and extract that prop, and on here create an onHandleChange and pass it that function so that if I go on this page and I start typing, now whatever I type in here is what I see. So at first it was an empty string like that. So now if I type in 1 or x, whatever I type in over here is now passed to the set state, which is now set into the empty string. I hope this is clear. Let me show you a way to understand this much better. So instead of the to-do page, I will console.log initial to do, and I'll save this. As you can see, there is nothing over here. But once I start typing, everything I type is now seen. This is the React virtual DOM in action. I hope this is much clearer. When I start, it's empty. When I start typing, everything that I type replaces and adds onto the empty string. Now I'm able to type in the info field. The next thing will be to look at how to submit what I type in the input field. So when I type in the input field and I click submit, I hit enter, I want that thing to replace the hello. Let's go ahead and implement this change. I'll go ahead and inside of the input form components, I'll add, for simplicity, an input field. Type will be submit, and the value, I will make it submit to do, like so. I will now go ahead and inside of the page, get rid of the console.log and create a function called handle form submit. What this function will do will be that it will take in an event. The event type will be a form event and it will return void because we don't want it to return anything. When I click on the submit button, I don't want an actual submit to be made. I don't want an actual post to be made, right? So I need to prevent that default implementation. And I can do this by saying that e.prevent default. And the next thing that I need to do is that when someone types in here like so, I want to be able to store this into something and then loop through that and then render that thing over here. So I need something like an array, a list, to store whatever the user puts in here. Because I do not have a database right now, what I can do is that I can create another state called to-dos and then a set to-dos. This will be useState, which will be a string, which will take in an array of strings, and initially it is an empty array. I can now come here and say that I want to set to-dos to be to-do.concat, and what I would like to pass it is the initial to-do. So I'll pass it the initial to-do here, like so. So after I've passed it the initial to-do, what I would like to do next is to clear the input field. So I will set the initial to-do to an empty string, like so. The next task will be to pass this to the form component. So I'll come here and create an onSubmit attribute or prop and set that to handle form submit. I now need to go back to the form and tell it that I'll pass it an onSubmit prop and tell it that it is of type function of this signature, and then it returns void. Go ahead and import this from React. Go back here and then make this concat. Now I can go back to the form and extract this prop and then call onSubmit and pass it that. The next thing I need to do is to pass whatever the user puts. Whatever I submit, I need to be able to render it inside of this div. So what I can do now is to pass this to-dos to the card component. So I can say list of to-dos will be that. As you can see, I'm getting an error because I'm not expecting, the component is not expecting that prop. So I need to go to that prop, copy this, go to that prop, which is the card component. I'll create a type and I'll call this card prop. And then I'll say you expect something called list of to-dos, which is a string of array, like so. I now need to pass this to the function component and then extract it. I can now loop through the list and then render each of the elements, each of the to-dos on the to-do page. So I can say that list of to-dos dot map each do, and I'll use the index as the key. Remember that it's not advisable to use the index as a key. I'm just using the index in this scenario to make things very easier and simple to understand. And this will return, give the UL element, li, and it will have each to do in it, and the key will be indexed. So now, if I go over here and type in I need to learn React, and I click on submit, it gets displayed on the view page. So this is a card. If I type in I need to learn Flask, that gets displayed as well. So a recap of whatever we've done. So what we've done in this section is that we initially created an initial to do and a set initial to do, which is like, our states that control the state of the application. We have two functions, handle input change and the handle form submit. What the handle input change function does is that when I change something in here, It replaces whatever I have typed in here and then stores it inside of the initial to do. What the handle form submit does is that when I click or when I submit the form, I pass whatever the user has typed in here. I put that into an array. That array gets passed to the card. I loop through that array and then displays that each to do element that the user typed on the card component. That is it for this section of the tutorial. The next section will be to use React Spring to animate the to-do application, and then we'll go on to test the application using just an enzyme. In the last video, we built a to-do application that lets us add a to-do like I would like to eat. But as you can see, it is a bit blunt. In this video, we will learn how to animate this using React Spring and make it look much better. To do this, we'll have to install the dependencies that we need for animation. So I'll go ahead and install React Spring and Node SAS npm install save dev node SAS. Now that that is completed, I'll also go ahead and install React Spring. So I'll say yarn add React Spring. Okay, so right now we have everything ready to get started. All right, so I'll come over here and inside of the app.ts file, I'll get rid of this because I don't really need it. So everything moves that way. That is exactly what we want to get started. The way that I like to structure React applications, if you haven't watched my video on structuring React applications, is that I want to have my CSS files inside of each component directory. So inside of the form component directory, I'll create a file called form.module.scss, which will be the file in which I will write my CSS. So I'll come over here and I'll create form.module.scss, like so. Inside of the application, I'll do the same thing for card. So I'll say card.module.scss. Now the first component that I would like to style is the form. So I'll come over here. So inside of React Spring, we have like different hooks and APIs that we can use. We have useSpring, which is used to move one item from one direction to another, from one position to another. We have useSprings, which is used to move lots of components or lots of items from one direction to another. And then useTrail, which I'm not going to talk about. And we have useTransition, which is used to transition items from one state to another state. What we're going to do is that we're going to use Spring to transition this input field, right, from one state to another. So basically, the input field is going to come from outside where you see it. It's going to come outside of the view and then do something like a whoop into the view. So it's going to come outside and come into the view. How we're going to do this is to import useSpring and animate it from React Spring. So the useSpring is the API that will let us move a component from one direction or from one position to another. Animated is what React uses to do the animation in our view component. So useSpring is the API that we use to move the component or to move an item from one position to another. Animated is what helps React animate, understand what the Spring system is. It makes React understand the animation that we want because React doesn't know what API we're using. React doesn't know what React Spring is. Animated is an interface that helps React and React Spring work together to animate our components. So I think I'm in the wrong component. I'll go to the form component and then import useSpring and animate it. The next thing I would like to do is to use the useSpring create a variable. I'm gonna call it const animation, or I'll call it form animation. this form animation, we use useSpring like so. useSpring, as you can see from the documentation, has a from and a to. The to is implicit. You can decide not to write that. The from, as the word suggests, tells where or from what position you want the animation to start. What I would like to do is to make the animation transform. So I'll say from text in a JavaScript object. I'll give it transform and I'll let it translate in the X direction minus 1%. And what I would like it to do is to move to, so transform, translate 30%. Okay, so what I have here, right, is that this input field here, right here, what I would like it to do is to transform from -1 position, so it will come outside. So basically this will be somewhere here and it will move 30% in the X direction in here. So that is something that we're going to do, is transforming from -1% to 30%. Now, what we need to do is to pass this to the component that we want, right? I would like to pass this to the form component. And like I said earlier, how React interacts with React Spring is through the animated API. So I will say animated.form, animated.form, like so. And then I need to pass the animation, the props, the style that I would like the animation to have. And this is the style that I would like the animation to have. So I will say style, form animation, like so. As you can see, when I start and I refresh the application, it moves from -1% in the X direction to 30% in the X direction. And this looks cool. Okay, I could make this 50% like so. And that's awesome. Let's make it 45 so that it will center. Okay, so that's simple. That's all you need to do to animate from one position to the other using React Spring. But now, if we type in something like hello, we have this over here and that over here. That's not what we want. We would like to also move this in a similar position and make this a bit cooler. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to use another API provided by React Spring called useTransition, which is used to transform elements from one state to the other. To do this, we have to go to the card component. This is because the card component has the list of to-dos, so we can get access to the list of to-dos here and then make our animation. What I'm going to do now is to import use transition like so and animate it from React Spring like so. Now that I have this, I'll do something similar to what I did in the form component. I'll create a constant called to do transition, which will use the use transition API. Now, the use transition takes us first parameter, the list of items that you would like to transition. So the list, all right? So list of to-dos. That is the list of to-dos. The array of to-dos is the first thing that it takes. The second parameter that it takes is a function that returns keys, or you can leave it as null. Now, when we were making the to-do application, what we could have done is to store the key of each to-do, but we didn't do that initially. So I'll go ahead and leave this as null for simplicity. The next parameter that it takes are the list of styles that we like to apply to each individual to-do element when it is rendered in the DOM. What I'll pass to it now is that I want it to go from opacity of 0, margin left of 100, so it'll be away from the screen. Then I would like you to enter So you will go from that and enter like so. So basically what we've done out here, or what we've done, let's go to the React Spring API. The use transition, it takes as the first argument the list or an array of anything that you want to transition from one state to the other. That is the first argument that it takes. The second argument that it takes is a key, a function, all right, that returns a key. We do not have a key for simplicity, so I left it as null. The next parameter that it takes is a from, okay, which is the state that you want each element to transition from, and then enter is the state that you want each element to transition to, and then you could have a last one which is called leave. But I'm not doing that for now, for simplicity. What I want you to get from this is to understand how to use transition and how to use useSpring when working with React Spring. The question is, how do I apply this, each of these styles, to the to-do element? How do I even apply this to that? How do I apply the styles to each of the cards? Well, to do this, I will comment this out and say return. I'll wrap everything inside of a div or a React fragment, okay, like so. And then the transition returns an array of elements. So I can say that to do transition dot map, I would like to map the to do transition. When I map it, what I like to do is extract. Okay, I would like to extract the items, which is each to do element. Each of the to do is what I call items. The key would have been the ID, which is currently null, and then props, which is the style. Each of these styles, okay, is called props. Now return. And what I like to return is animated .li to keep it simple. Well, I'll pass it items, then I'll pass it the props, okay? So I'll say style will be props, like so. So this should be item, not items, like so. A key and props, like so. So what I have right now is if I type in, I need to eat. So voila, I need to sing. I need to dance. I need to watch TV. So we've animated each of the to-do item in the array. But as you can see, we still have like these dots, you know. So I'll just make it a little bit pretty, but that's not the main focus of this tutorial. The main focus of this tutorial was to learn how to use React Spring to do basic animation in React. So that's how you animate stuff. So I'll go ahead and inside of the CSS file that I created earlier on, so card.model.scss, what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of style to make it look, just a little bit pretty. So I'll do dot. Now I need to import to use styles with React models. If you watch my video of how to structure React components, I go through this, but I'll say import style is dot slash cat the model.scss. So now if I say I need to sync, yes, like so. What I can do is to move this a bit to the left and make them all sync. And even if I wanted, what I could do is even animate the color and make the color come in a very nice way. But that is the out of the scope of this tutorial. The main scope of this tutorial was to learn the basics of React Spring and to learn how to use React Spring to animate React components. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and thanks for watching. If you want me to do some more advanced tutorial on React Spring, let me know and I can do that later on in the future. Thank you very much for watching.